All right, so for today's session, we're going to review the purposes of grading that we talked about last time, just kind of where we got with that. We're going to share our takeaways from the homework reading, which was about creating rubrics and making rubrics. Then we're going to introduce and practice a protocol for discussing a problem of practice around rubrics and discuss some rubric details. So that's what we're going to be doing today in our 90 minutes together. Our PLC timeline, just so you remember kind of where we're going with things. Last time we talked about our introduction, our purpose of grading, and the foundations of equitable grading. Today we'll be talking about rubrics for feedback and communication. Next time we'll be talking about motivating students. In April, we'll talk about some multiple opportunities. In May, we'll be talking about shifting the grading paradigm. And in June, we'll be doing some planning for next year. And we will set that June time when we get a little closer to that, because then people's schedules get a little bit more clear. Once again, our agenda for today is purpose of grading, debrief the homework, the protocol and rubrics of problems of practice, and rubric nuts and bolts. So that's sort of our agenda of where we're going to go to today. As you engage, you will be spending a lot of time in small group breakout rooms, talking with each other about rubrics and discussing some of the learning that you've done. Please, while you're in those rooms, be respectful. We want this to be a safe place where you have time to think and share, where you can critique ideas and not people, and providing support and encouragement. That way we can all sort of learn from each other and make this a valuable experience. Remember, all ideas are valuable. Monitor talking time so you're not the only person talking and that every voice is heard. Encourage those who haven't spoken up to speak up, and value different ways of thinking and sharing so that we all grow. The goal is for us to learn together, come prepared to work, share our thinking, ask questions, and build on the ideas of others. So last time we worked on our summary of our purpose for grading, and here are some of the things that you guys wrote about. You wrote that you wanted to measure the ability to demonstrate knowledge, communicate with students, and inform our practice, evaluate students and teachers as feedback, a current understanding of where we are in the learning cycle, where students are functioning, student readiness for the next stage, and to gauge student progress of knowledge acquisition. Meaningful for students, as well as a tool for students and teachers. And one potential summary we kind of got from putting all those together is that maybe it's to measure current understanding that both teachers and students can use to guide future learning. When we talk about purposes of grades, we came up with these last time: to communicate information, to provide evidence of student responsibility. These were the top 6, or the things that people said when teachers spoke about what the reasons for grades. But districts have come up with sort of more concise versions that really get at the heart. That's closer to what you guys came up with when you guys worked on your purpose of grades. So one district says the purpose of a report card is to inform students of instructors' evaluations of their academic progress in each of their classes. Grades reflect how well students met the established learning goals of each class, areas of outstanding performance, and areas where additional study and effort are required. Note, this goes to a lot of what you were saying earlier when you looked at your purpose of grades, that it's about what they've learned and where they are with that. Another district that kind of comes close to that says that the primary purpose of grading is to effectively communicate student achievement towards specific standards at a certain time. A grade should reflect what a student knows and is able to do. Students will receive separate feedback and evaluation on their learning habits, which is not included in the academic and achievement grades. Now, the reason we went over these grades and the reason we came up with our purpose of grades is, as we move forward in this journey towards more equitable grading practices, we want to keep those things in mind. And when we think about what it is we're doing and why it is we do things, we want to make sure that we're moving towards these goals of reporting where students are and keeping behavior separate, so that students understand what those grades mean and how they apply to their work.
Andrea, can I jump in and add a couple
Yes.
of comments?
Yes,
So the top 6 things there are like nationally, when teachers were asked what's the purpose of grades, the answers that they gave fell into one or more of these 6 categories. So the intent here is to kind of compare what you guys came up with last time on the previous slide with what, like, nationally, what teachers are saying. And you'll see that there's a lot of overlap, right? So we're all in good company here in terms of thinking about why are we grading kids? What I'm wondering right now is, do any of you find any of these 6 somewhat controversial?
And this is a little bit of a review of what we talked about last time. So if you want to go ahead and put that in the chat, you can go ahead and do that.
Which, if any, maybe none, feel controversial? Oh, I see new message. Yeah, I got to scroll down here. Let's see. Effort and responsibility. The one about selecting and identifying students. Right, awesome. It can hold students back from a track. Yes. Yeah, we're not trying to sort students, right? We're not in the business of sorting them, or we don't want to be in the business of sorting them, but we do have very real actions, usually in school districts, that do sort kids. Like, think elementary school and the social progression from 2nd to 3rd grade, right? Or grouping kids right there. The providing incentives to learn. Yeah, just like Nathan says in the chat, providing incentives to learn. Like, we want learning to be intrinsic, right? Not extrinsic. We don't necessarily want kids to learn because it's all about the grade. But does that happen? Certainly some kids are motivated by grades. So I would put probably those 2 in kind of the controversial category. The other thing I like about the purpose of grades from the district, bottom right corner, this statement's powerful to me. A grade should reflect what a student knows and is able to do. That's the heart of it right there. If I had to sum up all this work, that's the heart of it. And then, of course, our practices are, how do we get to that point? Okay, that's all I wanted to chime in. Thanks, Andrea.
Sure thing. So as we look at those with respect to our foundations of equitable grading, we want to make sure that we're focused in on that, showing what students are capable of doing, and making sure students are focused in on what are they capable of doing and what are we looking at. So in the 6 foundations of equitable grading, we are separating behavior work from academic work. Teaching and learning is specifically tied to a learning target. Students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning. Teachers and students use rubrics to communicate progression of learning and ensure equitable access to learning, so all teachers of the same course are in sync with common agreements. And we're really going to focus in today on the teaching and learning is tied to a specific learning target, and we communicate that learning target and the progression through the use of rubrics. And that's why I highlighted them both in yellow, so that that's what we're focusing on sort of today. And how do we use those rubrics to also focus in on our assessment and our interactions with students around those learning targets of what can students do and what have they learned to do. Now, later, we're going to be going into breakout rooms. These are your breakout room groups. We're going to be opening up rooms by number. So why don't you make sure that you write down what number you're going to be in. We can come back to this slide if you need to. But if you take a moment to write that down so you remember what group you're going to be joining when it's time to join a group, so you can wind up talking to your other folks. And it's okay if you joined a few minutes late. Just make sure, let's go ahead and get started. And there we're kind of setting the stage for where we were going with rubrics right now. So glad you're here. Now, when we get into the breakout rooms, if you need me to come back to this slide, just let me know. That is easy to do. If you're not on this list, it's because maybe we didn't have you signed up for a room right away. Let us know at the end, and then we'll tell you like where's a room where there are fewer people so that you can join that room. So Jessica, just hang out when we go to breakout rooms, and we'll put you in a room that has fewer people so that we can balance things out. And then if anybody else is in that situation as well, hang out when we go to breakout rooms, and we'll find some rooms that are smaller, and we'll add you in. Okay. Today in breakout rooms, the first thing we're going to do, and we're going to keep the same breakout rooms throughout the session today. The first thing is going to be just like a review of what articles we looked at last time for those of you who came last time. And if you weren't here, you can kind of just listen and ask questions, right? We want you to introduce yourself, your name, where you teach, what do you teach, and something positive that's happened this week, even if it's the snow that's happening right now. And then what article you read, because we gave you a couple choices. Summarize in a few sentences what the main takeaways were, and what questions do you have after reading. If you didn't get a chance to get to the readings, that's fine. Just kind of put where you are and what you got to. The readings were in the link for the sessions last time. Christy, do you mind dropping a link in the chat for the 2 readings we gave last time? Linked at the top of the chat. So, oh, in the presentation from session 1, here is the PLC presentation. On the close to the last slide of that presentation, there were the links for the 2 readings were in that presentation. And when you get done, you'll report out sort of on this next slide. You'll go in here and you'll say, hey, whatever room you were in, you can go ahead and put in what were the important points that were part of your discussion. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Is everybody clear about the instructions, or any questions before we jump into the breakout rooms? Did everybody get the articles they needed? Oh, thank you for putting those in there, Rachel, for the 2 articles that were there. All right. There is a link. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say breakout rooms are ready.
Okay.
And then I can open them. Andrea, are we all ready to go?
It looks like there needs to be somebody who joined a little bit late needs to get the breakout room, the slide link. I closed my sharing before doing that, so I couldn't get into my slides, but I'm only on one screen. So if you could drop the link for today's, there it is. So if you don't have the link for today so that you can add the slides, here it is again in the chat.
I just put it in.
Oh, you're super. All right. So I think we're ready to go. Go ahead and drop into the chat and have a good few minutes in there. I'm going to pause the recording. Pause this. Oops.
Right now, tackle some of those challenges. So I'm just looking at this slide right here. Let's take a minute to look over what other groups have written. There's a lot of good stuff on here.
Yeah.
time to develop rubrics. Rubrics can be very large. Takes a lot of time to explain it to students.
I like what group 3 says about that sort of checklist and rubric. I know that I had a lot of success of like students really getting it and understanding how to use the rubric and what it meant when I told them to use it as a checklist and we treated it as a checklist. And then when we were missing something, we could go back to, here's this thing on the checklist that I can't find. And sometimes they would be like, oh yeah. And sometimes they would have this, oh, but I think it's right here. And we would have those deeper conversations about what we were looking for and what they had showed me. So that checklist and rubric hybrid model was useful for me.
Yeah, and so that's something we can talk about is like, what's the difference between a rubric and a checklist, right? So that's a great point. I'm glad that someone brought that up. Single point rubric came up. Awesome. Love that. Before we move to the next slide, Susan, someone in the chat is asking about January's recording. Do you mind dropping the link in there for session 1 recording?
Sure, I'll do that right now.
Okay, Andrea, I'm ready for next slide. Okay, so let's talk about creating a rubric. So when I work on, so first let me say creating a rubric is like an art form, right? It's hard and it takes practice to do that. If you, you don't want to spend all this time making a rubric and like Andrea's example, and then hand it out to your students without any scaffolding for how to use the rubric. How does the student benefit from using the rubric? Like it's a skill, right? They have to learn how to do it. And if you don't explicitly teach how to use a rubric, they'll never look at it ever, right? And so then it feels pointless. Like, why are we even doing this? And then you might go back to handwriting comments on every single piece of student work, which is insane. Like, we can't do that. We have too many kids. We find ourselves writing the same stuff over and over again, right? That's one of the values of having a rubric is I go in and I highlight the text of what the evidence is showing me. And then right there on the rubric, it already describes what the next level of evidence would be showing, right? So I don't have to handwrite out all those comments. I mean, it's meant to be informative to the student and the family, and also a time saver for the teacher. So those are kind of some benefits of it. When I'm writing a rubric, I usually start with a 3-column. What is it that I want the kids to, at a minimum, I want them to walk away with this, to show that they get it. They get the gist of it, right? That's what the 3-column is. It's the gist. So when we're describing the text that goes in the boxes, it's not a novel, right? We're not going to be writing and writing. It's not prose. It's just some short, explicit expectations. It could be sentences, but there shouldn't be that many, right? It should be, and it should also be broken down by what are the pieces that I'm going to be looking for. So if my rubric is task specific and I'm looking at a lab, I might pick out these are the 4 things I'm going to be looking for in the lab. And I'm going to make each one of them is going to be a different line in the rubric. So I might decide that I'm going to be evaluating their hypothesis, their data table, their graph, and their conclusion, right? So I'm going to have a line, at least one line item for each of those. And I think people's comments on the previous slide are right on. We don't want the rubric to be unwieldy, right? Because that's going to be another invitation to not use it by students, right? We want it to be manageable, explicit, and concise.
And following on with what Christy's saying, some people just write the 3. They just write what proficient looks like. That's what that single point rubric is. And there's a link in the references that's a podcast on that single point rubric, whereas they write what they're looking for. and they work with students to identify what a developing would look like. And they work with students to develop what a highly proficient and what would be another way of demonstrating is. That's one way that they work on it to kind of make the rubric writing less. And also help make sure that students sort of understand what it means.
After that, I go into, so if I'm writing a full rubric, I would go to the 2 column. You could go to the 4 column next, but what you're basing it on is what you've written in the 3 column, right? What would be not quite a 3? I don't quite have the gist yet. What would that look like? Versus not only do I have the gist, but I've kind of taken it to another level. So a lot of times the 4 column is applying the knowledge to new and novel situations. I didn't give students that direction. They just went there with it. They're applying it maybe to a previous lab that they did, or they're applying it to some reading or something that we talked about in class, or something completely outside of what we've been doing in the classroom, right? They're taking it to something new and novel. Next slide, please.
I just want to add to the 2 part. I usually for the 2 write in all those things that students typically leave out. Like I often will have students do a claim and reasoning, but no evidence, or a claim and evidence with no reasoning. And so it's like missing either reasoning or evidence. And so that I can say like, well, this is the one that you're missing, right? So that can help them figure this out.
Forgive the numbering here. I was having a hard time doing a number continuation from one slide to the other. So continuing on, we try to avoid deficit language on a rubric. And I will tell you, this is hard to do, right? We want to talk about what the student's able to do, not what they're not doing, right? And again, sometimes you have to, because there's literally no other way to say it. So there's some room there, but in general, we try not to use deficit language. Use clear descriptive language. So I was just working with someone today on their rubric for digital illustration is the name of their new course. And he had in his 4 box, presentation of novel artistic work is excellent. And I go, what does that even mean? What does excellent mean? Because the student's not going to know what excellent means. So you have to articulate, when I look at your piece of artistic work, what's going to set it over the top? Not only do you have the gist, but you're applying it to something new. What could that look like? And it's a balance, because we don't want to list out all the possibilities, but we want to say more explicitly what excellent means. We know in our head when we're looking at something excellent, right? How can we articulate that to our students? Like I was saying before, you have to use this with your students over and over and over. Just like if you're doing a whiteboard meeting, you're doing A/B protocol, you're focusing on sentence, whatever it is, CER writing, whatever it is, it's not a one done, right? You have to do it many, many times in order for them to internalize the skill of how to use the rubric. Sometimes I do just like a think and write. So students will, just 3 minutes, we're going to think and write. And I give them a topic or a prompt or something on the board. So they think and write for 3 minutes. And then I have a very simple rubric that I put on the overhead, and I ask them to self-evaluate, and we walk through the process of how to do that. You can do that with exit tickets, bell ringers. You can do it with like short things in the beginning. Do lots of short things with very simple rubrics. And then we start to build complexity to our rubrics. Keep doing those short things, but now the rubric's a little bit more complex. Now it's got 2 rows in it instead of 1. How are you going to arrive at an overall grade, right? So walking through that with students. How do you arrive at an overall grade, right? So, and this is where kind of our next level with rubrics is to take it to your collaborative team, your common course team, and you use it to moderate student work. And that's where the good discussions come in, because you will realize as you go through the conversations, what's a deal breaker for you. Like a student has to show this in their CER, otherwise it's a 2. They don't have the gist if they don't talk about this. Well, that needs to go in your rubric then, right? And sometimes we don't dial down to that level of specificity until we have those conversations in our Common Course teams. So your first draft of your rubric is going to be exactly that. It's going to be a draft, and you'll have to, number 4, expect to revise it often, right? Just like your students, it's not going to be one and done. You're going to have to do it a few times. You're going to have to talk about it a few times, use it with students, refine, go back, use it again.
What do you want?
Okay.
And I heard some conversations in the chats when I was eavesdropping on people about how you don't want to be stuck with a certain set of limits or certain rubrics, and that's, you shouldn't be. You should check them every single year, maybe multiple times a year, to make sure, like, hey, as my understanding of what proficient looks like grows, so does my rubric.
All right, let's go next slide. I see we're about 5 minutes out, so So I have a couple of examples here, and this is something you should do with your students too. Examples and non-examples. The non-examples is important also. This is what the kind of thing I'm looking for. Here's what I'm not looking for. Or here's an example of a 2. Here's an example of a 4, right? Keep that previous student work so that you have those exemplars to show. Here's this pasted in rubric here. This is a task specific rubric that specifically it's for a STEM physics. I think it's like a shoe lab. So the criteria is down there on the left side. Notice how it's not verbose, right? That it's short statements. The criteria is 1-word things. And then each of the text in there is short statements. I'm sorry, hang on 1 second. Okay, so sorry, our building's closing because of the weather. So good thing we're wrapping up here. Task specific rubric is brief, and notice the very bottom line down there, that is on the rubric, but it's going to be reported on separately for a separate learning target because it's a behavior. The bottom 3 links are all learning target rubrics. So they're much bigger and broader. Notice that they're not science examples. So I just grabbed some examples that I thought did a really nice job, big picture. And this is like in musical theater, you can see what a target is, and then like, what are all the pieces in that target that the teacher wants the student to learn about. And notice that each one of them is a line item. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just coming back to our pillars of equitable practices. Which one of these do you think is related to our rubric work? Could you just type in the chat? Is it accurate? Is it bias resistant? Or is it motivational? Which one do you think? Nice. I'm seeing some accurate. I'm seeing all 3. Some bias resistant, and I'm seeing some motivational. So accurate is our grading uses calculations that are mathematically sound. So that one's tricky because on a rubric, right, we're not calculating anything. We're looking at where does the predominance of my highlights lie? Are they mostly in the 3 column? Then I would call the student work a 3, right? Erica says all 3 pillars are represented here, right? Love that. Bias resistant, our grades are based on valid evidence of a student's content knowledge. Notice rubrics, we're not putting behavior things in there, except the STEM physics, there was a behavior line, but with an asterisk that said, this is going to be reported on separately. Remember, the student's grade reflects what they know and are able to do. Not did they turn it in late, not did they have a bad attitude, not were they looking at their phone. What evidence did they submit? The grade is only reflecting that. And then when we know that, our practices motivate students, right? When it's transparent and the student can see what the learning progression is, it's not a mystery. I know how to progress. I know how to move along the progression of learning. That's motivational. And we'll talk more about that in another session. Next slide, please.
And so there were some great conversations. Hopefully you got some stuff from this, but if you want to continue to build your knowledge and understanding about rubrics, here's a few books by Brookhart and Gusky that you could look at to read further information to support your development. And of course, I love Cult of Pedagogy. So we're trying to give you a podcast in addition to some books. So there's a whole thing about the single point rubric. And if you want to continue to listen to her other stuff, that is also good. Come on, computer. Our next session will be March 22nd. We'll have the same Zoom link. Our homework for next time is to bring a problem of practice around student motivation. There's a few articles, just pick one to read. My personal favorite, I kind of really like that, creating the conditions for student motivation, but any of them have some good ideas and things to share. And then lastly, make sure you complete your exit ticket before leaving.
Look, you guys, we were 1 minute over and we weren't hardly rushed this time. So we're getting better. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate your time. And I hope you got some good stuff about rubrics today. Thank you so much.
I'm gonna end the recording because it told me to on the next slide.